Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today? My name is Constable Michelle Smith, and I am with the West Region Recruitment Unit. And with me today is Inspector Brooke McRoberts. But before we get into Inspector McRoberts' history with the OPP, I just wanted to share a little bit about my history with the OPP. I began in 1998. I did about 8 years on the road, moved into community services and media relations. Then I went back on the road for 6 months as the 2IC. Sergeant was off, so I was able to run the platoon for the 6 months, which was a great experience. And then I moved into the domestic violence investigator position. I did that for about 2 years. And then I successfully obtained a position as a detective in our crime unit, and I did that for 6 years. And my specialty within the crime unit actually was child-related offenses. So my kind of took its toll on me. And I know that's one thing that the OPP we really talk about is your stress management and your stress management tools. And at the time I thought I had some, but I didn't. And so I ended up crashing and burning, and I got the help that I needed. And I came back full support from the OPP. And when I came back, I needed to find another avenue. And that's when I moved into recruitment. I knew this was an area or a unit that I wanted to continue and finish my career in with the OPP,
so please bear with us.
hiring that next generation of officers. And so I've been in recruitment now for just about 3 years. So I seem to be having some technical difficulties. Inspector, are you able to hear me at all?
I can now. I was not hearing anything there for a little bit, so apologies to everybody for that.
Okay, yeah, we seem to be having some technical difficulties. I know at West Region we've been having some of our connections. So just quick again, I guess, quick of my career. I began in 98, did 8 years on the road, community services for about 2 years. And then I did on the road again as the 2IC for 6 months, moved into the domestic violence investigator position for 2 years. And then I obtained a position as a detective in our crime unit. And my specialty was child-related offenses. So after doing that for 6 years, it took its toll and I had to take a step back. And I ended up taking a leave, sought the treatment that I needed. And, you know, stress management is huge within our organization, and rightly so. So, you know, that is one thing that as you're preparing for a career in policing, having your stress management in order, having those support systems that you are going to need in this type of career is really only going to benefit your mental health. So I am very happy today to introduce Inspector McRoberts, who is now joined our recruitment team. And she's going to talk to us about the OPP's Indigenous Policing Bureau, as well as her experience as a First Nation police officer with the OPP. Now, Inspector McRoberts, what drew you to policing?
Before I start, Michelle, and thank you for that great intro, and please let me acknowledge my appreciation to you for you sharing your own journey with mental wellness and resiliency that it takes in this job, and I commend you for sharing that. I think it's so important that we normalize conversations around this to effectively support each other and members coming into the organization. So miigwech, Michelle. Anin Bojo, Brooke McRoberts and Disnakaj, Minjikaning Donjaba, Gigo Dodam. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brooke McRoberts, and I just introduced myself in my own language. I am Ojibwe. I'm a First Nations Ojibwe member of Rama First Nation, which is also known as Minjikaning in our own language. I also said Gigo Dodam. You'll see the beautiful fish behind me here. I'm from the Fish Clan, which is what that term means, Gigo Dodam. It's my pleasure to join you all today and share about my own experiences and my own journey into policing. And to answer and revert back to your question, Michelle, I actually started policing in my home community with Rama Police, which falls under, and I'll explain this a little bit more down further as we go along, but Rama Police falls under the Ontario First Nations Policing Agreement, which all of Canada, all the provinces, all of the territories have some sort of formalized process to support First Nations policing under the federal legislation of First Nations Policing Program. So here in Ontario, we refer to that as the OFNPA. I started policing in 2005, and what drew me to policing was actually I grew up around police officers. It was something that I was quite familiar with, having a lot of law enforcement within my family. And I knew from a very early age in life that this was the path that I would eventually go down. However, education was also important to me. So kind of waylaying that until I finished my education. But I think one of the bigger pieces was that growing up, like I said, around police officers and having that element of trust in those individuals. It was never something that made me nervous or was certainly never afraid of police officers. As I got older and learned about who I was as an Indigenous person and learning more about Canadian history and learning things like what we're talking about today with Truth and Reconciliation, learning about the history of residential schools and other government imposed policies and practices that really impacted Indigenous communities in an extremely negative way. And as I grew up, I learned more about how police were part of that and what our historical role was with residential school enforcement and how that impacted relationships between Indigenous people and police. Um, I saw a number of things happen when I was younger. And like I said, I grew up with a very trusting relationship with police as I learned more about my own background as an Indigenous person and realized not everybody grows up with that. It became something that I really questioned as to why and how do we fix it. So I spent a lot of my early education years in post secondary learning about this stuff. And when I came into applying to the policing profession, I wanted to then action the things that I learned. So policing in my home community with Rama was important to me to set that example, to give back to my community and to mentor other youth within my community of, we can do this too. We can do this and build that trust in the institution and in the system that is supposed to protect us as Indigenous people and as citizens of Ontario. Over the course of my career with them, I did similar to yourself, Michelle. You wear many hats in First Nations policing, and obviously the focus is general law enforcement. But I got involved in a lot of different aspects around community mobilization, community safety work, working with kids in the school, also building collaborative relationships with the health and social services side to ensure that we're providing that wraparound support to community members. So building relationships within my own community to best serve the community that we all live and work within. So after a period of time and involvement in very similar criminal offenses became something that I was very passionate about. Offenses against children, domestic violence, elder abuse, all of those types of investigations really were the things that I was very passionate about and extremely committed to. But at the same time, similar to small town policing anywhere, if you grow up and live in a small community, you do have to balance, your job as a law enforcement officer and everybody knowing who you are and managing relationships with family, people you grew up with, and all of those challenges. So around 2015 is when I made the decision to leave Rama Police and join the OPP. So when I joined the OPP in 2015 as an experienced police officer, I was stationed in West Perry Sound Detachment in Northeast Region and policed there for 2 years. Ultimately, one of the reasons why I chose the OPP was the Indigenous Policing Bureau. The work I had been doing in my own community, I really wanted to take that and continue to do that on a broader scale. So the goal for me at that time in my career was to be in the Indigenous Policing Bureau in the OPP and be part of the Indigenous Awareness Training Unit and increase our understanding as police officers of Canadian history, of Indigenous history, and understanding the relationship and the dynamics and the responsibility we have as law enforcement officers to understand these principles and understand this history in order to do our jobs in a culturally responsive way. I feel like I'm going on a lot here, Michelle.
I love hearing the history and what brought you to where you are right now. I know personally as a recruiter that it is something that when we go through our questions is talking about their understanding of the history of our Indigenous communities and the importance of it because of our shared policing. And it does warm my heart that, part of the reason you came to the OPP was to kind of blend those two communities and bring the skills you have already gathered from your first career with the Rama Police into the OPP, which is only going to make our service even better. But tell me, what is about the purpose of the Indigenous Policing Bureau? What is the basis behind it? What is, what kind of pushes it to go forward?
Yeah, and it does. Although the OPP, so was one of the biggest things when I had made the decision to leave my community and kind of, for lack of a better term, spread my wings outside of my own community. I had looked at a number of different policing agencies, and one thing that stood out to me is that there wasn't anything like what the OPP had with the Indigenous Policing Bureau. At that time in 2015, when I patched over, they had the Indigenous Awareness Training Unit, which is responsible for Indigenous awareness training. When you come through the OPP as a recruit, you will receive a set number of Indigenous awareness training before you leave the Provincial Police Academy and start in your work location. As well, we have a 5-day course that we facilitate, and it's open to all frontline members within the organization. And it is such an impactful course. And that was really my goal, was to education is always something I've been extremely passionate about. And that was my goal, was to work within that environment. The Indigenous awareness training in this organization has actually existed since the late 1990s. In 1995, we had the Ipperwash crisis, which ultimately saw, an event between police and Indigenous community that ended with the shooting of Dudley George in that community. Out of that came an inquiry with some recommendations around making sure that we appropriately resource and have something like the Indigenous Policing Bureau, which ultimately was expanded on and built into an independent bureau within the organization after the Ipperwash inquiry. So there's some pretty amazing programming that exists within that. So in addition to the Indigenous awareness training that we offer to all of our members within the organization, they also have the provincial liaison team and the Ontario First Nations Policing Agreement, which provides administrative support to the First Nations policing services that we administer or that we support throughout the province of Ontario. So just circling back to the provincial liaison team when it was first developed, it was kind of a two-pronged team called ART and MELT, and it was the Aboriginal Relations team and then the Major Event Liaison team, so ART and MELT. They started to realize that there was a lot of overlap between the two teams, so they amalgamated them into one to make the Provincial Liaison team. So the job of PLT, and there are experts and people who work permanently in that program that can speak better to this, but their job is to things like the Ottawa Convoy, different protests and demonstrations. We make recommendations to groups as to how to ensure that their event is lawful, peaceful, and safe. We know constitutional charter rights do dictate you do have a right to express your opinion. Our goal with the provincial liaison team is to work to outreach to these groups and to advise, on processes and policies to ensure that these events are, again, lawful, peaceful, safe. And then, maintain communications with whether it's Indigenous communities or non-Indigenous communities, anybody who may be impacted by any critical events that we are involved in as an organization. or sometimes that we will go and support other municipal services that are experiencing similar events in their jurisdiction.
Wonderful. Now, what is it like for yourself being a First Nation police officer?
I've had some of the best experiences. Like I mentioned, the OPP was really the option that I went with because of the Indigenous Policing Bureau and the work that I wanted to do, but also the opportunities that present itself for different career opportunities. You look at even just the career I've had. I've got, I'll be at 19 years. In service in policing, and I've worked with Rama Police for a number of years. I worked in the Indigenous Awareness Training Unit. After I left the Indigenous Awareness Training Unit, I was promoted as sergeant into the provincial liaison team as their training and policy coordinator. And then I left that position and I was promoted as staff sergeant to oversee the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls team. And that implementation of the calls for justice from the National Inquiry into MMIWG within the organization. And melded into those goals, I've had opportunity to support communities through different crises, like for communities being displaced and evacuated out of their homes due to forest fires, due to flooding. I've had opportunities to support communities and our crime units with some substantial criminal investigations in my role as PLT. I've had opportunities to connect and work with Indigenous communities to build Indigenous advisory circles within the organization. And so the opportunities have been endless in what I can do and what opportunities have been provided to me through my career. And now here I am leaving the MMIWG implementation team and coming into uniform recruitment. So, you see the variety of work that you can do. And for me, it is all about adventure. It is all about passion and loving the things you do, and having that opportunity to try something new and have some variety. So throughout the course of my career, it's just been incredible opportunity after incredible opportunity to work, in our northern communities, in our southern communities, and just network and build relationships, both with Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities across the province. So I can't tell you, Michelle, I feel extremely privileged and extremely lucky to have the career I've had to date.
And we're very lucky to have you within our unit now. We're, our unit is growing by, daily with the requirements that we have with all these great applicants, applying to the OPP. And I know that one of our key things is diversifying, right? We want to have officers that are policing the community in which they come from. So this is just one more step that the OPP is putting forward in order to, to make those bridges that we need to chips and stuff. And I've said this before. I have 5 years left, but the direction in which our organization is going is great to see. I've had the experience of working with PLT members, and we're very thankful, the connections that they had and developed relationships that really helped our investigations, had them kind of go in to kind of soften things, which was quite nice. And the behind the scenes work that a lot of the road officers aren't aware of what our PLT members do. So it's nice to have those units, and those are career opportunities that our recruits can even think about doing once they've completed and they're at the first class constable stage, that they can most certainly look into those specialized units if they find that topic interesting or a desire to continue with developing that path. So we've got a question that just came in here. It says, what research should a potential candidate look into regarding First Nations policing, and our history as part of the interviewing process? Would you like me to answer that one, Inspector? Or would you like
to? You want to start? Yeah, no, go ahead and start that off, Michelle. Thank you.
So the research, the one thing that we will recommend is if you look on our website, opp.ca/careers, We do have Be the Bridge challenge that you can complete, as well as an inclusion and diversity challenge. Now, it's not just specific, doing research just simply on one community, but having that understanding will certainly help you for your interview, but more importantly for your career with the OPP. We do police several different communities and such like that, but those two programs or challenges that we have will certainly help you prepare for your interview. But the grand scheme of things is the hopes that when you're successful, it's also going to help you as a career as an OPP officer. Now, the next one, what helps you as a recruiter leave an interview with a candidate feeling like they are a good fit for the OPP or policing in general? Caitlin, I love that question. I could say personally, when I do my interviews, a lot of it I base on their communication skills. How do they, portray? And the one thing is, can I sit in a cruiser with them for 12 hours and we get along? So I'm a pretty easygoing person, but when I talk to them, it's that we're all kind of cut from that same cloth of how we see the world, I guess, and policing in general. And so you kind of get that feel for people during their interview. But really, it's that self-confidence and effectively answering the questions, having prepared those responses. We give you the 10 areas of assessment. Those are what our questions are going to be drawn from. So looking at our 10 areas of assessment, you're certainly going to be able to evaluate yourself and have prepared examples for each of those assessments. And that is what's going to impress your recruiter, because it shows us your motivation, that you've done the research. It shows if you've done your self-assessment and that you have developed and practiced. And this isn't just a whim. This is a career choice that people, it's not just a job. This is something that you will spend 30 plus years in. And we want to make sure the people that are joining our service are the ones that really want to be there. And, that is shown in the amount of work that they put in before they actually set up for their interview. Is there anything you would like to add to that, Inspector?
Michelle, I just wanted to. Yeah, actually, the first question, I just wanted to even give a couple options or some ideas to people. One of the things that we encourage our recruits to do once they are in and receiving training from our Indigenous Awareness Training Unit is do the research on the detachment areas you're interested in. The entire province, the entire country it is the traditional territory of someone, and there is a treaty that is signed between an Indigenous community, a sovereign nation, and the Crown. So, one of the things we encourage people is to learn the traditional territory of where is this detachment that I've asked, that I've requested, whose traditional territory is it in? What treaty area are we located in? Here in GHQ, we're sitting in Williams Treaty territory, which is my community's traditional territory here, but understanding what the history of that treaty is and whose land was this before colonization. So when we talk about land acknowledgements, this is part of what we're encouraging people to learn about, is that it's not just about saying the words, it's about doing the research and understanding the history of the land that we're walking on, the history of the land that we're policing within. I'm not sure if we lost Michelle here, and I don't know if I have the questions open to me, but we can carry on talking about that. Luckily, I can talk about truth and reconciliation all day long, and I don't have the questions, unfortunately, that you guys are all sending in, but we'll talk a little bit about truth and reconciliation and how today became to be the day that it is recognized on September 30th. So for anybody who isn't familiar with this, It actually is an elder out in the West Coast around. She had been taken to residential schools, and her family had bought her a brand new orange shirt, and how much that shirt meant to her, and how excited she was to wear this to school on her first day at school. When she was taken into residential schools, they took that orange shirt from her. So the orange shirt, it's although at that surface level, it does just seem like a shirt. It represents so much more around what was taken from Indigenous people through the enforcement of residential schools, language, culture, our identity, our connection to family. When you think about if you remove a child from loving parents, from loving family, and take them away from those things, how we learn how to parent is from our parents, and how we learn how to kiss our loved ones when they have a boo-boo on their knee, how we read our stories to our children and hold them tight when they're scared. These are all things that you lose that access to family, and you lose that ability to understand how important that human connection is, and how important it is to wrap our children in love. So when we talk about intergenerational trauma, that's what we're talking about, is generations of families who didn't have access to that family connection and into that loving environment of safety and security for their kids. And then when they were removed from residential school and told to move on and become, members of society and to raise their own families, they haven't had that ability to and that experience of within a family dynamic. So it is extremely challenging now. And now we see that intergenerational or that ripple effect of how residential schools didn't just impact individuals who attended. It impacts the rippling effect. It impacts generations following them. So, these are all the concepts and some of the things that we talk about within our Indigenous awareness training with our members, and the importance of understanding. Oh, Michelle, you're back.
Gotta love technology. I'm hot spotted now with my work phones. Hopefully that will keep me connected.
Yeah. So I actually can't figure out how to find the questions on here. So if you have them
Yeah,
up
I
there,
see that they're
wonderful.
gone since I came back. Um, yeah. So if anybody wants to start sending messages again, hopefully they start coming up. Sorry, everybody, for the technical issues we're having. Um, did you end up getting through the point that you wanted to make in regards to resources and stuff that people can access?
Well, actually, yeah, yep, we did have a bit of a chat about that already.
Okay, wonderful.
And so I had
Nope,
just
I see
started
right
going
here.
into a little bit of things. Yeah, yeah, we're definitely having
Have you
some
started the
technical
areas of
difficulties
assessment?
today. Nope, go ahead.
Okay. So someone has asked us about the assessment. If you go onto our website, www.opp.ca/careers, and look up the 10 areas of assessment. Those areas of assessment include your education, employment, motivation, communication skills, driving, your fitness levels. It kind of goes through all 10 areas. So what we always recommend is printing that off, or, whether I'm old school, I always like paper copies, but, and just kind of doing notes, jotting down notes of how would you grade yourself from a 1 to 10, on 10 being you can't get any more developed in that particular section of assessment, or 1, you've got nothing completed and you really have to start working on it. So when you're at a point, you should be applying at the point when you're looking at the assessment wheel and realize, I am at my competitive best. I have done absolutely everything I can to show my skills, my abilities, and to be a strong candidate. That's what we want to see. And you need to do that self-assessment in all 10 areas, because that is what we are continuously assessing you on throughout the process. Okay, so our questions are back. Wonderful. Somebody says, I'm not sure how to initiate the process to apply. Again, hop to our website, click on the recruit if you're looking to be a recruit constable with the OPP. Our application is on there. It is all done electronically. We have our faxing questions on there as well. We are literally leading you through the path of exactly what we require from you. So just follow our instructions, look at the faxing questions to see if there's anything that, if you do have a question related that you can't see, you will find it in there, or you can always send OPP recruitment an email. And then at that point, you can certainly, sorry, we're just getting more messages. At that point, you can certainly see if there's areas that you need to work on by looking through that application process. Okay, so here's a great question. Can you tell me about being a female in policing and how your experience as an Indigenous woman has been?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. In all honesty, I think there's so much value, and it's so important to have diverse perspectives throughout the fabric of this organization and of any institution, particularly in our field of work, any policing institution. I have to say that I think ability to have empathy and understand the importance of things like language nuances, understanding cultural perspectives that somebody may I'll use eye contact as an example. In our communities, it's not uncommon for people to avoid eye contact, but I think in a historical policing context, that's usually viewed as something that is you might be hiding something, or people might question, why aren't you looking at me in the eye? Like it's a level of honesty or dishonesty, and from a cultural perspective, it's neither. That's just it's just part of the culture. So and that's where I think that the diverse perspectives are so important, because if we only have one, it's almost like an affinity bias where it's like-minded people all the time. You start to lose those nuances, and even in language, I find sometimes, it might a term or a phrase might mean something very specific in policing language, but in a cultural context, it might mean something very, very different. And being able to decipher between the two brings a lot of understanding, mutual understanding between two groups. So I'll use the term, I remember one time we were talking about investigations, and somebody had framed it as a traditional criminal investigation. So from a policing perspective, I kind of have an idea of what they're meaning in that sense. But from an Indigenous person's understanding in space, traditional means something very, very different. And it's more of a reference to culture and whether you practice your traditional culture. So when they hear the term traditional and investigation put together, that's a phrase that might not make sense. So I have found over the course of my career, having the ability to it's almost like speaking two different languages and understanding, I know what you're saying and I know what you're saying, and I understand where the differences are and why we aren't connecting the way we need to be. And I think, I have to say, at the same time, with Rama Police, I was the only girl there for a period of time, and it's like having 15 brothers to this day. My family at Rama Police, the guys that I work with there, they're still like my big brothers. Some of them have retired, and some of them have moved on. But you build these families and you build these connections. You spend so much time with your coworkers and with your platoon mates, and it becomes very special relationships that will last your career. So both from an Indigenous and female perspective, I've been extremely fortunate to build these little families and these little circles in every location that I've worked in, and those are still relationships that I value and rely on today. So it's a pretty unique profession in that regard of how you build your policing family across the province with this organization.
Absolutely, well said. I can say as a female within this organization, I've never had any different treatment or anything like that. I think it's all about how you approach the career, how you approach what you want out of the organization. There are some special things that, in some cases, female officers have that little bit, as you mentioned, sometimes a more of a sensitive side. A lot of our victims, unfortunately, are women and tend to feel more comfortable talking to someone that they identify with. So, in terms of that, we are able to kind of shine and bring our own specialized skills to the set of whatever the goal is in the end, right? So whether that's getting a disclosure from somebody or getting a witness statement, and it all comes down to no matter what their gender or how they identify, culture, community, languages, it's knowing how to make that adjustment and that change when you're talking with people that it's not always going to be negative. Not every interaction with the police that we see as a police officer will be negative. It's just maybe changing how you're communicating. And I do have to say the training that we get as OPP officers, and especially with our de-escalation skills and using our communication skills as our number one approach to any situation, this is where it all begins, is understanding the differences between all of us and having empathy, but also being to a point where you're willing to listen to other people and realize, yes, we are not all the same. We all come from diverse backgrounds, culturally, and just growing up living, right? So these are all things that make you a great officer, is having that open mind and that open-handed approach of constant development and changing and learning. I know within the OPP, that is one thing we're really pushing, and we do push for our recruits too, is that continuous education. And the reasoning we're doing that is if you aren't growing and developing yourself, then you're just staying in a one lane, right? That single-minded mentality, which is going to not be beneficial to the organization. So, broadening your horizons, traveling, speaking with people from different cultures, learning from other people is the only way that we can really grow and develop and figure out ways that we can all live together harmoniously. So someone, JL said here, you mentioned self-confidence and an understanding of the areas you're applying for. Is there anything else that makes an individual stand out when applying? Your application, when your application goes in, the overall application is pre-screened. And that's where we're pulling everything that you have provided us within your application: qualifications, certifications, your educational background, employment background, references. So that is where it all begins. You are selling yourself as a competitive candidate by providing us with all the information as to why we should select you to move to the next process. And that carries all the way through into the interview stage, into our background stage, and again, finally, with our psychological testing. So the one thing that I can always tell during an interview is, one, if someone has had experience with interviews, we are currently doing them virtually. So it is a bit of a different platform for some people. So I always recommend practice with somebody. Have somebody on another screen asking you employment related questions to help you feel comfortable talking about yourself, because that's what you're going to be doing for an hour to 2 hours, is talking to the recruiter about yourself and literally selling yourself as to why we should choose you and select you to be a strong candidate. Now, the next question here is, in regards to an application to the auxiliary program, would living close to a detachment be a benefit? So I can quickly answer that one. In relation to your auxiliary program, you are placed within the jurisdiction in which you reside. So let's say currently I'm in London right now. So Middlesex detachment would be the detachment that you would be posted to. So when you're applying to the entire auxiliary program, but then you are placed within the detachment, and your interviews and such are done at the detachment level, so that you are selected to meet their requirements that each detachment specifically is looking for. Are the resources provided to help reach the fitness requirements before applying, the shuttle run specifically? Absolutely. We have provided you with numerous amounts of videos, articles, information sessions, everything that we're providing, and specific doing fitness sessions as well. So take a look at our website. We also have follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram. We're on there, and we are specifically posting about our topics of assessment, and one of them being the fitness. And we do actually have a fitness link that gets posted that is specific about fitness and giving you tips on how to be successful for your program. I do really recommend attending an information session, and if you can't in person, doing one online. We go through the different steps of assessment. We talk about your requirements. And I know personally, when I do give an information session, I love to give advice on how to improve your numbers that you're providing, what as a recruiter we like to see that's going to show all your abilities, whether it's in fitness or education. The whole 10 areas of assessment, you have to, push yourself and show everything that you've done to get to the point of your application. Is there any helpful advice for how to prepare ahead of time for OPC or the Ontario Police College if you do not have an education background in law? Would you like to answer this one, Inspector?
Yeah, and I didn't take police foundations when I went to school, and I think our OPC is really well equipped to give you the background and the education that you need to be successful in this career. I took Indigenous community development, and actually I took hotel resort administration also. So very outside the realm of policing. And like I said, there's a lot of resources and there's a lot of learning that all takes place at OPC. So I wouldn't focus too much attention of making sure you have that background. I think it's more priority that you show that continuous learning that Michelle's already mentioned. Anything to add to that, Michelle?
Yeah, the only other thing I would, pick something you're interested in. We want to see those high grades. We want to see your abilities. And if you're in a program that you're only doing just to complete, you're not going to have your full heart into it. So pick a program. There's lots of transferable skills and training that you can get in many different fields of the education through college or university, trade school, anything like that. All of them have their ways that can be integrated into a policing career, right? We've had people that have done, they've done trade skills, electricians and things like that, and they can get within our specialized units, or they have computer skills, accounting. There's so many different avenues within policing. It most certainly does not have to be law. I didn't do law. I did sociology, which was more just the studying of people in university. And that's what I did and applied right after I graduated. So I had zero law outside of maybe grade 11 law class. That was my only law education I had going. But, you're provided with your in-class sessions, your studying, group sessions, your exams. You are given the information, and it is up to you to study it, retain it, and regurgitate it through your testing. And the only way to improve that is to continue with your learning so that you're used to, taking in the knowledge and having the ability to regurgitate it orally or written otherwise. And that's how you're going to be successful. And for those people that maybe studying and that isn't really, their forte, we do peer support within the OPP. So our candidates will get together, we'll identify, let's say there's a candidate who maybe isn't so great with the schooling side of things, but we have another candidate who's top, they're find studying and testing very easily. We'll pair them up to help each other study. There's the same thing with fitness. We find some of our candidates are highly physically capable and others are just simply passing. And again, we can team them up as a peer support to kind of help develop. It is a team atmosphere that we like to portray. And that is just another way that the OPP does that. So we work with you. But yeah, taking that time to do your extra preparing before you go will certainly help you be ready for the police college. Now, here's a great question for you, Inspector. Could you discuss the sorts of training police officers are given to better prepare themselves for when conversing with Indigenous people in distress?
Yeah, and in addition to, I know Michelle's already mentioned the great de-escalation training that we have as part of our recruit training. When you do go to Indigenous awareness training, we do have, like I said, 5 days of training. that's all geared towards understanding Canadian history, understanding socioeconomic and current issues within Indigenous communities. But also within that, we have communications practices kind of embedded throughout the whole 5-day course, but with one specific session near the end of the week to talk about some of those language nuances and some of those pieces of communication. And because even from a community level, and I think a big part of that conversation also has to be is understanding diversity within First Nations itself. So, our communities that how a community that's on the border of the United States and Canada, their issues and their language, their culture could be very, very different than one of the fly-in communities in Northern Ontario that we police. It could be very very different language, very different cultural traditions. So, when we talk about how communications practices, it's also important for us to realize that what works in one community won't necessarily work or is applicable to all communities, and it's important for us as a police agency to recognize those sovereign nations and the diversity that exists within First Nations, but also how we interact and how we engage is going to be specific to their community. So, I use an example of I speak Ojibwe. A greeting in Ojibwe is Anin. And that might not necessarily be the greeting you want to use if you go into an Oneida community or a Mohawk community, because their language is going to be very, very different. So again, when it comes down to when you have your detachment identified, do the research and learn about the land and who lived there before and who that land belongs to and what language and what cultural considerations have to be taken into account.
I would have to say that as a recruiter, because we allow our applicants to choose 6 detachment postings. And personally, I always like when they've done a little bit of research into the detachments that they've selected, not just because it's where they currently live or they're familiar. You want this to be a location where, it's going to fit their lifestyle, their career goals, things like that. But I would love, and I'm putting this out there to anybody who gets to be interviewed by me, I would love that if you have chosen a detachment area that is specific, that we do police First Nation communities, to have a little bit of that background knowledge to impress your recruiters. I'm certain that would go over quite well to show that motivation, that you've not just chosen these because they're convenient. You've chosen them for a reason, but you've also gone a little bit further. You've gone in to say that if I'm selected, I have that knowledge and baseline prior to going out to those communities, which I think is just amazing. So I'm just putting that out there to anybody who's watching. Feel free to impress me. I always love to be impressed during my interviews. Okay. So another question from Blackout. Would having a firearms license for a non-restricted and restricted firearm be considered a special skill for the auxiliary program application? Absolutely. Any special training or qualifications that you've done is a special skill at all levels of our application: special constable, cadet, auxiliary, and recruit. So, always having those little bits of extras is going to give you, again, that leg up. I always call special skills bonus points. Those are the things that you bring to the table that perhaps not every applicant will bring, right? Every applicant has to have a full G license. Every applicant has to have a grade 12 education or an equivalent. So all that little extra stuff that you've done is certainly going to make you stand out a little bit more than another applicant who had it. So anything like that would certainly help. How long is this foundation program provided by the OPP? OPC. So the program, to go to OPC, things have actually changed recently, with our going 4 times a year, unless they're talking about the program for our Indigenous awareness.
It says OPC. I'm wondering if they mean recruit training, like basic constable training.
Yeah, it most likely is. So things have changed. It used to be 3 times a year you would go. You would spend 1 week up in Aurelia at the Provincial Academy, and this is where you get your uniform. You meet the rest of the recruits in the OPP class. We get you prepared to attend the college. The college then was 12 weeks long, and then an additional 8 weeks back up at the academy where we specifically train you on OPP equipment, technology, things like that to help you get prepared. So now I believe it's still going to be the same amount of time. However, there's going to be different avenues that the police college is taking over that 12-week period of time in order to fit different classes in. So the program itself is going to cover your basics of, criminal law, provincial law, traffic stops, vehicle driving, scenarios, defensive tactics, firearms, the whole gambit. Everything is thrown at you, plus your fitness, lots and lots of running. So if you're not running, start running now, because you'd be prepared to do lots of running at both the academy and the police college. So it looks like we've actually answered all our questions, which is wonderful. Is there anything that you would like to end on a note, or any stories that you would love to share with our group here, Inspector?
I just encourage everybody to take the time. Truth and Reconciliation is now recognized as a national day of remembrance here in Canada, and I encourage everybody to take the opportunity to attend an event, to attend a memorial, or flag raising, whatever the case may be, to educate yourself and learn more about the significance and the importance of the day, and to honor and acknowledge the survivors of residential schools and the children who never returned home. Miigwech.
Thank you. And everybody have a great day. Please sign in every Tuesday, and we'll have different events that are running. Take care.